welcome to From Crisis to Capability. Can flexible education solve the engineering skills gap? My name's Josh Robertson. I'm the founder of Engineer a Career, and we're modernising the way that engineering talent across the UK is engaged and connected with industry. With the demand for engineering and construction skills higher than ever, we have a huge opportunity to build new systems that make careers in these sectors more visible, inclusive, and accessible to everyone. I'm delighted to be hosting this discussion with the Open University. Earlier this year, the Open University released its Business Barometer 2025, a report built on employer data that highlights the scale of this challenge. The research was conducted through an online survey of more than 2,000 senior decision makers from recruitment in the UK businesses with 2 or more employees. The survey carried out in May 2025 covered all sectors and regions of the UK and was just over half representing small and medium-sized businesses. Together this data gives us a clear picture of where skill shortages are being felt and, more importantly, where the opportunities lie. One of the headline data sets found that 58% of engineering and construction employers are experiencing a skills shortage. So that figure sets the scene for today's discussion. So I've got an awesome panel of guests who are each going to provide their own perspective of this challenge. We have Mark Cameron, CEO of the 5% Club, Faye Banks, Global Head of Transmission and Distribution from Turner and Townsend, Neil Arlett, Head of Mechanical and Electrical Engineering at BIFA, and Dr. Gareth Neighbour, Senior Lecturer in Engineering at the Open University. So starting off with yourself, Mark, if you'd like to give us a brief introduction of you and your role.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. So my name's Mark Cameron. I'm the Chief Executive of the 5% Club. We're a skills charity and we work with about 1,200 plus employers in the UK to inspire them to deliver earn and learn programs. So that's in this space really apprenticeships and graduate schemes, and we'll explore that more fully later. My background, I've been in HR for 25 plus years, hence why I run the 5% Club, but I'm also a chartered engineer. So I can talk briefly to the topic as well.
Thanks a lot, Mark. And over to you, Faye.
Yeah, thanks for that, Josh. Good morning, everybody. My name's Faye Banks, and I am the head of transmission and distribution for Turner and Townsend. So my role is working across the transmission and distribution sector, helping clients with their major program delivery, as well as that cost and commercial support.
A lot, Faye. And Neil, over to you.
Good morning, Josh. Thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm head of mechanical and engineering projects for BIFA. I'm part of the group engineering division, and we work across the entire business, providing solutions from gas generation through to recycling of plastics and designing and building recycling facilities throughout the UK.
Great to have you on board, Neil. And to create a bit of balance, we've got someone from the academic world as well, especially from the Open University. So good morning, Dr. Gareth, over to you.
Thanks, Josh. Hello, everyone. So I'm a regional academic within the Open University, so that means I help manage the tutors and tuition delivery from a day-to-day side of things. But I'm also involved in the teachings side quite strongly through chairing a module, a capstone module called T885 Team Engineering. My background, I'm very much from the carbon materials kind of world. And so I still practice as a chartered engineer with the energy industries in particular, but I also got some projects related to risk and governance nuclear sector, but also in terms of skills and employer facing education is my passion.
Thank you very much, Gareth. So how's this discussion going to work? We have 3 separate parts. So part 1, the engineering skills shortage. We'll then move into the second part, which is engineering as a career. And then we'll close off with widening access through education. So let's get started. Part 1, the engineering skills shortage. In the Barometer report, it shows that 54% of UK organisations are facing a current skills shortage, and that's having a real impact across every sector. So starting off with yourself, Mark, where are you seeing the greatest pressure points when it comes to finding engineering talent?
I think that's a very nice question, but it's clearly very, very detailed. So I think when we work with our employers, there's a real juxtaposition between early careers and mid-career talent. So most of the companies we work with, particularly those in the engineering sector, report an overwhelm with applicants from early careers, particularly people looking to get on an apprenticeship, which perhaps we'll come back to. But when they go to mid-seniority, they can see they've got like a black hole. So there's a real dearth of talent, and all of them report an aging workforce. And that aging workforce has been aging for 30 or 40 years, which would imply that some sectors have reduced in size as people retire. So there's a real challenge around the sort of government current tilt towards encouraging young people to get on an apprenticeship and an employer's ability to offer that apprenticeship when employers in particular want to do that reskill upskill. And certainly we see a growth of our employer members wanting to do level 4 and above apprenticeships. We see a massive decline in grad schemes. And coupled to that, there's a lot of young people at university studying engineering who don't then proceed into an engineering career because people are after their mind, and their mind is very useful for other things. So it's a very complex picture, and it's got to be, I think, personally, be viewed as a system as opposed to the individual component parts, which unfortunately perhaps is part of the challenge when people pick off let's introduce a foundation apprenticeship or introduce apprentice modules without thinking about the wider impact. And perhaps we'll discuss that more fully as we go forward.
Thanks a lot for that, Mark. It's almost about understanding where the gaps are and creating the systems to close it, which almost comes away from what our original or current systems have been for so long. Over to you then, Faye. How are these shortages affecting the delivery and performance within Turner and Townsend?
I think if you look at the energy sector just in general, so wider than T&D and Turner and Townsend operate wider than transmission and distribution, what we are seeing is that we're facing critical shortage across that engineering talent, particularly in areas that are essential to the UK net zero transition. So when we look at programmes, the ASTI, which is the Accelerated Strategic Transmission Infrastructure Programme, and the Great Grid Programme. So employers across that transmission and distribution and wider renewables actually are finding it difficult to basically recruit those protection engineers, which is quite significant. Grid planning, operational technologies. We talk about digital and digitalisation transformation in the DNOs, for example. There's a shortage, which Mark's just explained there, about the ageing workforce and the kind of rapid pace of infrastructure expansion that we're currently facing. Also, there's the National Grid's ESO connection reforms that are growing significantly. Obviously, there's prioritisation, there's great Gate 2 reforms, for example. And there's a big skills shortage and skills gaps around the development consent orders, as all these major programmes are coming to fruition. And many organisations we're seeing are facing the same barrier of recruiting those engineers with that experience. But also there's the digital substation, again going from DNO to DSO. There's that transformation. There's the low carbon technologies. So you look at the major programs in offshore wind integration, and obviously there's a wider hydrogen ready networks. And that program, major program delivery experience, it's very, very different to managing projects, but we see those skill shortages across the sector.
Thanks for sharing that, Faye. It's almost not only unique to one sector, and I'm sure you feel that as well, Neil. So what steps are you taking within your organisation to build skills internally?
Well, we are currently we've taken on 20 apprentices over the past 2 years, which are in the electrical and mechanical engineering sphere. They're involved in mechatronics, which we think is the way forward. We've also got engineering managers going through the OU engineering degree, which is, I think, very key to improving that middle ground that's disappeared over the past few years. Speaking as one of the aging workforce, in 5 years' time, I'm going to be retiring. I don't see people coming in to fill those holes because there isn't the breadth of experience that we used to have. And this isn't something that's just happened. This is something that I think we as an industry, engineering industry, are paying for 30 years of neglect, I think, is the way I would look at it. We've neglected the engineering sector in terms of training and encouraging people to come into it. Now, that's probably just a personal experience, but I think I can remember working for firms where we didn't take on apprentices for 10, 15 years. So we've created those holes, and then we've got no one to train those apprentices, which is my real concern. Is it's great having all these apprentices, but who's going to train them? Who's going to pass those necessary basic skills on working in industry? And I think that's right across the board.
Thanks a lot for sharing that, Neil. We have so much opportunity across multiple sectors. So there's the positive outlook which we can have of the upskilling and utilising the skills that we've got across the experienced workforce. But as you've quite rightly covered in your own personal situation, time's almost running out to utilise it from your point.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key fears I have, is that we have no way of getting that information into a form where we can pass it on. You can only spend so much time with someone passing on knowledge, but that's a one-on-one. We're in a situation probably where you need to be 1 on 10, 1 on 15, 1 on however many, because we have a dearth of knowledge, dearth of people that want to pick up that knowledge.
And Mark, within the 5% Club, there's a number of different innovative ways which both promote and champion the upskilling of engineers within organisations. Can you share some of the work that you do within your organisation?
Yes, so our members are constantly on the lookout, and like I say, I think the reskill upskill is important. I think unfortunately a number of the sectors are suffering a bit with an image issue, which we perhaps could come back to. And for instance, we were with defence companies last week who have a massive problem about getting UK nationals who can get through their security clearance, but once they get people on board, they pull them in. Other sectors are pulling them across. So financial services is a great attractor. And they were sort of saying, well, why can't we get people from financial services back to our sector? And there are barriers like wages and things, etc. I think we also need to think about image. I think engineers are really good at showing really big engineering projects. So you build a nuclear power station, you put a picture of a nuclear power station or a big digger or a big bridge. It's not particularly inspirational to a person. And what's needed is perhaps more people describing their own personal journeys, particularly if we're to get people on that zigzag career to zig into the engineering sector. A STEM returner, somebody who's had a child, or somebody who was an accountant. How can you stimulate them? Say, look, you've got the mind. Why not consider doing this as a career, be it project management or the hands-on engineering? But we've got to work on the image, because engineering is really hard. I speak as one that moved away from engineering because it was really, really hard. And there's other career pathways you can pursue which are a bit easier. And also, make it a bit about people and not about big, complicated projects, to inspire people to want to get back into the sector.
Thanks for sharing that, Mark. That's invaluable. As part of the work we do at Engineer Career, we talk about telling the right story. And in particular, through our podcast and events, we share the stories of today's engineers with tomorrow's, with that sole purpose in mind, to humanise that.
Absolutely.
And the majority of the time, we're speaking to university students and college students and those who are maybe thinking about an apprenticeship. So Gareth, tapping into the academic side of the discussion, how can universities and employers collaborate more effectively to respond to the shortage?
Well, I think the discussion so far has been very insightful. And, if we look at the Open University in particular and engineering students, we know that something like 3/4 of our students come without any higher education experience. But we also know that 70% of our students are roughly employed, and half of those report that they need the qualification to progress into their career further. And that very much reflects what Mark and Neil and Faye are saying, really, that, that there is this kind of bottleneck, if nothing else, in the mid-career side of things. I think in terms of, employers, I think the situation is quite interesting in many respects. I mean, we just talked about shortages. That's a problem that's been around a while. And if you think about a very early report from the OECD back in 2000, they really talked about wanting universities to be flexible. They really wanted, they talked about institutions to produce well-rounded individuals. We see some of that happening since then. Certainly, in terms of well-roundedness, that started the UTC movement perhaps back 10 years or so ago, trying to get that kind of all-encompassing STEM education. And then in terms of flexibility, well, you can't get much more flexible than the European University. Study when you want, at a time that's convenient to you, etc., etc., etc. And it's being open to everybody. So I think, from an employer's perspective, there's a real opportunity there, particularly with the OU, because of course there's no geographical boundaries for the OU. We operate across all four nations very easily. Wherever you may be and whatever you may be doing, we can support you in that. What I find interesting currently, of course, is the latest developments in terms of the government's push towards more level 5 qualifications. And I think that also kind of indicates a little bit of this kind of bottleneck that we've just talked about in terms of mid-career. And the OU allows students to complete a qualification with a certificate or a foundation degree or a degree, and then have a break and then come back and continue. And so that adds more to that idea of flexibility again. And some of the work that I've been currently doing, what I term employer-facing education, really talks about the need to be agile and the need from the institution agility and the flexibility needed by the students. And I think the OU and it does that. I'm sure we're not the only ones. I'm sure there's others in the sectors. But I think it also reflects current government thinking as well in terms of the push towards level 5, and also the local skills investment plans, which we're seeing on a much more regional basis now. And again, from an OU perspective, we need to engage with employers across those different regions. It's not one size fits all anymore, and it's really important. I was also interested in terms of the kind of insightful aspect of the image of engineering. And I think one lesson I learned many years ago is that, one of the things we have to communicate is we have to communicate to prospective engineers that they have the opportunity to live their dream, as it were. And I used to, many years ago, work with the Formula One industry. And it just allows people to realize their dream, as it were. Now, that's one extreme, but I think that example, being able to communicate that, is really important, and employers have a real task to be part of that communication. It can't be just education. And I know the employers that I've worked with engaged with our students, right from the first year through the second into the third and up to in the fourth year of a master's program. And so when they graduate, they're hitting the ground running within the employer. Well, to some extent, that's like apprenticeships too. And there are other qualifications as well, but that's what we have to do. We have to make sure there's a very strong employer university nexus in order to achieve that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Gareth. And you've hit a lot of notes that chime quite strongly with myself and the work that I see with students and wanting to see where they can be. Yeah. You'll have heard the saying, you can't be what you can't see, and that is so important, especially with the challenges that we face. I'd like to go into a couple of points that you mentioned around the experience of the OU, and by complete chance, obviously Faye's on the panel, who is an OU graduate and has benefited from the you could say unique or the flexible learning which you can benefit from. So Faye, could you share some of your personal experience with the OU when you were through the degrees that you've studied?
Yeah, not a problem at all, Josh. I think from my perspective, I didn't have any options. I was in employment. I'd completed a 5 years apprenticeship in electrical engineering back in the late 90s. So for me, being in a full-time job, I couldn't afford to, obviously step out of that role. And I wasn't in a position to be able to go part-time to university. So obviously, I had the flexibility of studying modules. My ambition when I first started with the Open University was just to get, like a certification or certificate in engineering. And what happened is, I ended up doing one module, then I kind of got, the appetite to want to grow because I was quite nervous because obviously you're thinking, well, university education is going to be really difficult. Getting on a pathway to complete a degree is going to be really difficult.
Thanks a lot for sharing that, Faye. So moving into part two, engineering as a career. As part of the Business Barometer Report 2025, which the Open University produced to understand the views of younger generation, they surveyed 1,000 Gen Z respondents. So that was aged 18 to 24. And that was to build the perceptions of the skills in the UK. So over half, 57%, said they're aware that the UK is currently experiencing a skills crisis. And their awareness but we'll still need to make engineering careers more visible and appealing. That's what we focus on engineer career. We create the human connection required to help individuals see what they can be. The focus is moving away from purely salaries and benefits. People now want to know about the projects, the purpose and the culture and people behind organisations. And those are becoming the biggest factors in how the next generation choose where they want to start their career. So starting with yourself, Mark, what's helping to make engineering feel like a career that young people can connect with?
So I think we need to be alive to the four generational workplace is importantly. I think employers are increasingly getting alive to Gen Z and the Gen Z attitudes and all of the barriers they face and programs like adolescence, which caught people's mind early in the years, has really brought into sharp contrast how the multiple screens they use on a daily basis impact on their mental health, which is a big issue for young people. Young people have a real challenge, which is we've got such a healthy and safe workplace. Their ability to get work experience and develop employability skills is a real challenge, and we need to be very alive to that. I also think that as people transition from education in all their various guises, the pressure on young people to find a job is immensely hard because if graduates are emerging from university and can't get on a grad scheme, graduates take other jobs, which means those who left school at 16 without qualifications will really, really struggle to get into the workplace as employers pursue a more traditional approach. The credentials, have you got maths and English at a certain level, which is a massive barrier for engineering. Now, I used to head up engineering or head up recruiting in the Royal Navy, and we worked on that principle, which was young people leave school, don't put the engineering or the maths or the physics or the chemistry barrier in their way. Look at their mind, look at their aptitude, see if they've got an aptitude for engineering, not just qualifications, because sometimes qualifications are more of a measure of application in education than they are an aptitude. And if you start to do that, you start to unlock that potential and also understand, the barriers that people have got in place based on, stereotypes of engineering, particularly construction, and there's a massive male bias. There's people with all the various protected characteristics, and some sectors are quite again stereotypical. So how you can unlock all of that. But for me, for engineering's a mindset, not just a load of paper with qualifications on. How can you start to unlock that, gamify recruitment, go for aptitude to get people onto the pathway, then onto a foundation apprenticeship, and articulate that you can join on a foundation apprenticeship and go all the way to master's level if you want. There's no barriers. And engineering does offer a fantastic pyramid of progression that people can pursue.
Thanks for sharing that, Mark, and for covering off the qualification versus mindset. It's a debate that consistently appears at the moment on my feeds and the conversations I have at events. And I think it's really important for us to celebrate that the mindset as the workplace is evolving and as technology and the definition of an engineer is going to change over the coming years, and to slowly take it away from the qualification mindset. But Mark taps into some really interesting points there, and I'd like to ask you, what progress have you seen when it comes to attracting more women and underrepresented groups into engineering?
Yeah, it's interesting question actually. So when I started my career in engineering, so that was 95, so 30 years ago, um, the percentage of women in the sector at the time was around 5%. So you move forward, what now, 3 decades, 30 years, and we're at what, 16.9%. So not a significant amount of progress there, so 11%. So it's not being great at all. When I speak to young women and different demographics, specifically, they want to see role models. They want to see what's achievable because there's still this, perception that engineers are car mechanics, and that there's a lot of confusion around what roles are across the sector. People, if I explain to somebody I'm an engineer, automatically they think that I'm, kind of maintaining cars, which, because this technician role and engineer role is kind of, it's wide ranging across the UK. So there's a lot of a lack of understanding. I think what I've seen differently over the years is that, when we first had a push, probably about 20 years ago, there was momentum from industry, there were cross-sector work, and there were groups, professional groups coming together, and I've not seen that same impetus that I saw kind of early thousands. There were a significant push across water sector, energy sector, and wider infrastructure sectors, and it's as if we've kind of taken our eyes off the balls, because there's now in the sector across these major programs, the wider infrastructure, energy sectors, etc., everybody's kind of fighting for talent, and we need to come together. We need to come together as wider sectors to actually look at how we're going to address these problems with, obviously, professional organisations, academic institutes, training, because we've got to get the capacity of training. You can't just bring people into the sector without training. And and one of the things that's also a barrier is that we're really focused on that technical skill sets. We need people that can problem solve. We need people that can think outside the box. We need people that can work in teams. And then obviously when you start looking at some of the roles, so the digital roles, then we need individuals that can really kind of focus and like working independently on some of the digital capabilities that's required to take the digital grid forward and wider technology. So it's kind of, we've got a problem statement. We know we need to widen it, but actually there's nothing below that to say, right, how are we going to go and how are we going to work across the sector? Because all the wider infrastructure problems need the same resources, and it's we need to kind of come from that problem statement a level down and look at how we're going to get this cross sector working, how we're going to bring, as jobs go down and as we move up, how we're going to bring that capability across, and that's what's missing for me. That's what's really missing.
Over to you, Gareth. How have you seen the attracting women and underrepresented groups evolving within the academic space? Because we do see that there is a drop-off of certain demographics post-graduation, which therefore means they don't enter the workplace, and therefore we have a stagnated number of, for example, women in engineering. How have you seen that evolve over time?
Wow, what a question. I mean, that's really, difficult to answer in many ways. What I would say is that, the problems that you've outlined have been around for not just decades, almost centuries now. If you go back to the formation of the Women's Engineering Society, which was over a century ago, what progress, as Faye says, have we really made? I think, the comment earlier was about stressing the kind of human nature of things. And I think that's one thing the engineering profession probably hasn't done enough of, because what we do know is that once we talk about health applications or people-centric applications, the interest grows, not just, in all parts of society, I would say, the interest grows. I think, from again, picking up the word that was used a while ago, from a systems perspective, we need to be thinking about what's the motivators, what motivates people to get involved. It's not, as you say, it's not just about pay, and it's not just about just role models either. It's a much more broader aspect. So I think, we've seen some progress. And I think the other thing that underlines things a little bit more for me is, as we've just mentioned, the word engineering is probably unhelpful. And if we can think about using on other terms, because engineering is so broad, we go from software developers to kind of space technicians to whatever it may be, and that's got nothing to do with the old stereotypical image of somebody in a boiler suit, for example, which still kind of haunts us to this day. And I think, if we start to stress some of the kind of aspects that and the problems, societal problems, the societal challenges that we face, and how we try to deal with those within our own courses, then I think we have a better mechanism to communicate. I think coupled with that, we need to stop kind of pushing and pulling more. And if we can pull more young people through, then we stand a better chance. Just pushing it out there and expecting people just to come rather than pull isn't, we need to be thinking a bit more broader. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, because it's a very complex question and it's full of nuances. And I'll give you one very simple example. Um, I think, this is my own personal view, is that, we need to introduce people to the, not, I don't mean just the word engineering or the concept of engineering, I mean the technical side of life much more earlier, and I mean primary schools for that. And we know some organizations have tried to do that in recent years. But I think it's by the time we get to secondary school and we get to kind of choosing GCSEs, it's almost too late. So that doesn't mean people can't re-enter, can't transfer, all the rest of it. But psychologically, we've created some damage, I suspect, there. So we need to encompass much earlier in life what a technical life might mean. And I deliberately try not to use the word engineering there, but you get the idea. Whatever word it is, let's stop trying to push forward this stereotype and push forward the broader societal challenges that we face.
One of the very common challenges and real life examples that I see at events and engagement with students is students that are graduating and not getting roles, similar to what you said at the start, Mark, due to the chase for a graduate role. If we entice more people into engineering roles due to their mindset, what can we do, Mark, to onboard graduates into the workplace better so that we don't have a drop off and ultimately lose talent to, for example, other industries such as the finance industry?
Yeah, I think it's picking a bit up on what Gareth said is about the decision pathway. So I reflect on my own journey. I became an engineer because I was good at maths and physics at school, and I was sort of just pushed towards it because careers advice was shocking, and it's like you're going to be an engineer, so you just do it. Um, actually, once you get into the workplace, you realise there's lots of other roles. I think, but we need to understand that sort of pathway, which is sowing the seeds at an early stage, and focusing in on the young people and recognizing that people at university, by the end of year one, 60% of young people have started to make a choice about where they're going to go. By the end of year three, what you start to see is people go on to master's programs because they've left it too late, so they defer the inevitable career choice. Recruiters get that, and to get the engineers, you have to get in onto the campus and offer that work development, offer those internships, offer those industry placements, and make sure that people are going to stay in the sector. Because if you're on a traditional sandwich course and you signed up for a 4-year degree with a year in industry, if you can't get into an engineering company, you'll go to another sector that entices you. And once you've gone on one of those placements, that's you recruited into that company because they get the tentacles into you. But I think we also need to just think a bit more broadly, and it's not just about young people. It's about people that are currently, there's 9.5 million people economically inactive. 3 million of those face barriers to come back to work. Over 50s have got great minds, but they're just put off by the fact they didn't do engineering. How can you get someone in their 50s who's got masses of life experience in what people call transferable skills into an engineering pathway? Mums and fathers coming back from parental leave, they're natural career changers. There's such an opportunity, and there's some great programs, but they're all really small. So think broad, think about, as Gareth said, how you can get people with those individual stories and get people at school, yes, but also there's a message, it's not too late. There are massive opportunities. Faye described the OU pathway. I think it's a great pathway. Other such pathways to get people to rethink a career after a natural break.
You've caught me just before we go into widening access. You've got us there, Mark. So thanks a lot for sharing those key points. And absolutely, it's we have a multiple different demographics right across the UK that we can tap into, from STEM returner programs to diversifying career changers as well. But over to yourself, Neil. Our final point on part two, which is engineering as a career. As an employer, how are you adapting to the different expectations and strengths that different generations, and particularly the younger generation, bring?
I think we find it a struggle in some respects because there is a definite mindset difference between Gen Z and the generations that were before them. I think what we are trying to do is we try to make it as interesting, as exciting as possible, in terms of we're not just putting them with someone and you're going to file that piece of metal because that's what we did 20 years ago and that's what they did 30 years ago. We're actually giving them meaningful things to do and be involved in. So they're out on the factory floors with people, dealing with real issues that we have around our plants and facilities. And we have an engineering academy within Biffa, which we have a dedicated manager, and they make sure that they're engaged, fully supported, and we deal with all sorts of things, whether it be the not understanding of a particular issue that they've picked up through the engineering college, to we've had some engineering designers that we're bringing through, and something as basic as how do we engage them with other engineers, because it's a new role. What are we going to do with them? How are we going to utilize them? What can we give them that is meaningful and exciting to do? And give them those life skills to be an engineer. And to Faye's point, some of the best engineers that I've come across have been women, because they have the ability to think differently. They've got more imagination. So for real problem solving, some of the best engineers we've got are young women. And they've not necessarily been steered into that role. They've fallen into that role. But by God, they're some of the best engineers I've ever worked with.
It's all about sharing that deal.
I don't know if that answers your question, but that's...
No, it does. Well, you're providing real life context, which is exactly why we're asking these questions, and exactly why you're here, Neil. So getting out all of you before you retire in 5 years.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot for sharing that. So we're going to go into the final part now, which Mark has touched on already, which is widening access through education. And some strong data points that came from the report highlighted that 71% of Gen Z believe it's the employer's responsibility to provide training and development. And that shows how important it is that learning is flexible and accessible and aligned with the way people want to build their careers. The research also found that young people are ready to learn in the workplace. They're looking for employers who will give them that opportunity to invest in their growth. So starting with yourself, Gareth, how is the Open University helping employers and learners use flexible education to close the skills gap? Do you have any particular examples that stand out?
Yeah, so I think the first thing we've got to recognize is that the opportunities are quite broad in terms of learning. So that it can mean non-certificated training through the employer. It can mean taster courses, particularly through Open Learn, and it can involve types of training within apprenticeships and so on. But for the Open University, we also got our qualifications as well. But we also engage in kind of various projects, and I'll just mention one project that I'm familiar with, which is called Project Medri, which operates in Wales and is funded by the Welsh Government, and trying to teach digital skills to employees, particularly in the North of Wales, and that's in collaboration with other organisations amongst ourselves. And that's been a very successful project and gone through 3 phases now, and I hope to see it continue. And the message there, I think, is when employers identify their needs, particularly in skills needs, and talk to providers like the OU and other educational institutions, then real things can happen. I'm not sure if that quite answers your question, but it is an example. There's an example there, as well as the broad area of the kind of responsiveness that we can provide.
No, absolutely, Gareth. No, that's an excellent example. So thank you. Amongst many in industry, most would recognise the Open University as the flexible education path. There is other universities, obviously, that provide that. I guess since COVID, things have evolved, but the OU have always been one of the flag bearers for that. So over to yourself, Mark, with the hundreds of employers that you deal with as part of your membership at the 5% Club. Is there any particular employer or employers which are what are they doing to make development opportunities more adaptable to modern work patterns, which we're beginning to see?
Yeah, so I think there's a whole bunch of things, but of course what they're generally working in concert with a training provider, as Gareth said, in order to deliver the various courses. I think what we see, and we've not really touched on the difference between large companies and small companies. Obviously, there are massive barriers for small companies, particularly in getting that training partner to deliver what they need, when often their needs are very niche. And we've got in our membership, a fair few small companies, and I mean small, less than 250 employees, normally less than 200 employees, who have developed their own learning academies, gone to an industrial estate, taken over a unit, built an academy, deliver the off-the-job training, and they have, upwards of 50% of their workforce at any time on an apprenticeship, and they're enticing young people in, across all those barriers we discussed earlier, with the attraction of immediate work, meaningful work, really good pay, and this sort of continuous development in the activities. And what we've also seen is some of the success rates are really high. So, there was a celebration earlier in the year about, apprenticeship completion rates getting above 60%. These guys are delivering above 90%, and they've got a motivated workforce, which, coming back to some of the stuff we've done with the OU in the past, this idea of learning as a benefit. If your employer continually invests in you, you'll stick with your employer, and you'll continue to learn and evolve. So there's loads of examples of that, and I'm sure other panel members have got their own. But I think that sort of approach, the Richard Branson, treat people as give them the skills so they leave, treat them well enough so they stay, kind of thing. That's where it really works.
No, thanks for sharing that, Mark. And over to yourself, Neil. What challenges and benefits have you seen when combining on-the-job learning with formal study?
I think it's the biggest one I've seen is for the guys that we've got going through the OU in that middle space, is that they have quite demanding jobs in itself as engineering managers, and it's them finding the time to actually sit down and study. And that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges. Is the OU courses that I've seen that they're doing are fantastic. And to be perfectly honest, I wish I'd done my degree that way rather than go to an institution. I think it's much more valuable. But I do think it's giving them the space to be able to do that academic learning. And then once they've done that academic learning, give them the space to actually apply it. And that sometimes is a little bit more tricky when you're in that middle space, because you've got all these ideas fizzing and buzzing around your head. And there's not always the opportunity to do that. And one of the things I've done is, because we do some fairly large projects within the group, if there's a site manager that I know, site engineering manager that I know is going through the OU, I'll drag him in rather than just being on the bits and pieces that he normally is involved with that affects his site operation, is to involve them in a different space. So they can actually apply that. And sometimes we'll sit there and go, Neil, you're doing it wrong, because this is what I've learned. and then you can have that debate. And they do. I think it's that ability to be to give them the space, not the space, the opportunity to apply that knowledge in a relatively safe space, that they can see it working, can put practical experience to the academic. And the other point is, when we have people that not necessarily got the academic qualifications that everybody talks about, is sometimes those guys, if you can get them involved practically, you've got a brain that, you pay for the hands, but the brain comes free. They can bring their interest, which is worth more than all the academics, is if they've got a real interest and hunger, you can make that grow and then steer them towards that academic pathway. And I think that is the beauty of the space we operate in now, as opposed to 20 or 30 years ago, where it's very regimented. You have to have a degree for this, you have to have a HND for that. And that was wrong. And we have to look at the institutions, the IMechE, the IChemE, all of those have some responsibility to bear, because they're changing now. But some of the problems we've got were the system. We didn't encourage people to be engineers. Engineering is about life. Everything we touch is an engineering product. And that is the way to enthuse people. It's, not just to talk about, oh, it's a big, super sexy aircraft that flies through the air. It's the cup you're holding in your hand. It's the pair of shoes you put on every morning. It's all that sort of stuff that is is the real engineering in the world. It's something we all touch and get involved in. And that, if you can get over the enthusiasm that I put on my anorak and go, oh, I really like the fact that paperclip is made in that way. That's the way you encourage people to come into engineering. It's not just to show them big jobs. It's to say, well, that coat you're wearing, that's an engineering product. How do we get to that?
Yeah, no, Neil, you've absolutely you've nailed it on the head. It's when I open up the podcast, I always ask someone what sparked your interest in engineering, and then when I close it out, I always ask what keeps you passionate. And hearing the array of different answers you get to that really makes you realise that the breadth of engineering as a career, and what gets people going. And I think the earlier you identify that in someone, whether that's maybe it doesn't actually, maybe not the earlier, if you can identify that with someone, or someone can identify what keps them passionate about engineering,
it
can
is
be the
about
fuel.
that. Absolutely, it is about the fueling of it. I mean, I'm a nerd for, how do we get pieces of plastic out of glass when it's broken? That's one of my nerdy little things, and I will talk for hours about it. And I don't like doing it because it shouldn't be there. But people get, oh, well, that's interesting. Why do you do that? And something as simple as, that jacket you're wearing. That's we have a machine that makes that. How do you design that machine? You think about that. That's the real thing. And my daughter, she's not an engineer by any way, shape, or form, but she's enthused by Formula One, and it's not the racing, it's the technology that really excites her, and she's enthusiastic about it. And she'll tell you about, I think it's Bernie Collins, who was an engineer and now is in the TV presenter, but she's come through that engineering role, and it's her enthusiasm about motorsport and the background she's got drags people in. And we have a responsibility to do that, whether it be from an academic point of view, from a manager's point of view. This sort of thing is fantastic, I think, for beefing up that idea. And I mean, I was struck by Faye's enthusiasm about the sector she's in. Some of the things she's talking about, I hadn't even considered. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. And more power to her for being able to verbalize it in such a passionate and interesting way that I, as an old engineer and a mechanical engineer, want to know a little bit more about it. That to me is what what engineering is about. It touches everything we do, and it touches everyone.
No, thanks for that, Neil. Your passion's coming across as well, so hats off to you for that. I think one thing you tap into at the start of your answer, which is something I like to celebrate. I see all this as an opportunity rather than negative. I know that there is challenges that we face, but there is opportunities. But the point you made, we have so many different routes to a career in engineering.
Yeah.
And you're maybe correct in terms of we haven't championed that as an industry over the last X 30 odd years. But when you sit down and you look at all the different routes, whether that is through college, whether it be through apprenticeships, traineeships, whether it do university, there's numbers of different routes, and as an industry, we need to bring all that together and simplify the processes as simple as possible, so it comes down to that one person. They've got an engineering mindset. What route best suits their learning outcome and the way that they learn? Are they a visual learner? Do they like being, and then do they need to be in a lecture theatre like I was? And then not stigmatize the terminology of engineer when it comes to it, not dependent on a degree, dependent on doing the engineering and building those solutions. So thanks a lot for sharing that, Neil.
Thank you.
Over to you then, Faye. Going back to your experience of the OU, but more so now as a leader, and having a team of engineers within your team, what impact have you seen that flexible study routes have had on your team, and also recruitment efforts as well in terms of attracting new engineers in?
Well, I think what's interesting is picking up on obviously most of the panel's conversations today is that what I generally find with people that are aspirational engineers or natural problem solvers, that we're generally more pragmatic learners. And I think the reality is that as a nation we've been focused on the academic qualifications, and it's how do we bring that together. I think a lot of great craftspeople or a lot of great technicians are very scared when you tell them, right, you need to qualify to become a chartered engineer, or we don't respect that technicians are the veins of all this kind of coming together. And we're always focusing on engineering, but for me we need to kind of get those grassroots, the real technical skills up through the craft, up through the technicians, and then through the engineers, because they are the people that do the work. Going back to Neil's point there, they're the people that make the things. And that's definitely one of the kind of dying trades that I see over lots of different sectors, because it's one of the skill sets I picked up on my apprenticeship, turning, milling, lathes, etc. Everything's kind of automated now. And but I think what for me personally, I think ultimately the Open University. So going back to everybody's points again, there's so many different ways that you can get into engineering. You don't need the masters in engineering or the bachelors in engineering. For me, if anybody's listening today that's not working in the sector, or is working in the sector but not in an engineering role, the reality is as we're having these debates, and a number of debates that that we all form parts of, whether it's professional bodies or the Royal Academy of Engineer, where I spend a lot of my time, we need those softer skills. So we need the people that are motivated, that have got a great work ethic, that really wants to make a difference. Back to Neil's point, so millennials and kind of Generation Z, they want to contribute to society. What better career to have than having a career in engineering, where we do transform that, whether it's medical, whether it's digital technology, whether it is a transmission network, a rail network. And I think we've got to move away from the narrative or the discourse that we used 20 years ago. Because I don't, the report that the Royal Academy published last week, I was down obviously in Royal Academy last week, and actually the names have totally changed. So because these names aren't familiar with this new kind of demographic that we're bringing into the workplace, so we've got to all, as engineers and in the sector, start using the language that this next generation and kind of career kind of returners, or individuals moving in from different sectors, what do those jobs look like? And actually, how are you making a difference to wider society? Because that's my passion. I want to make things better for everybody. Back to a cup. Yeah, let's get things quicker, faster, keep people in job, let's manufacture more, etc., etc. And for me, we're kind of, in some ways, we're missing that basic point. In relation to the recruitment, well, I come back to it's not just there's not just that it can't just be one group. Employers, educational institutes, all these governing bodies, we have to create those pathways. We have to recreate, it's not just one organization that's going to it's multifaceted, stop the these graduates, for example, that are not getting jobs that are engineers. In a sector where we're looking at 100,000 in energy and then 200,000 across water sector, for example, we can't be saying to young engineers that have invested in their time, money, troubles to get to that level and then not provide jobs. And we have to take responsibility. We've got to get those graduate schemes, the apprenticeship schemes, returners to work. And actually, the biggest thing is committing to that. If anybody tells me that they've not got 100% graduate success rate or apprenticeship, we're letting them down in industry. It should be, my responsibility. If I bring graduates in or apprentices or returners, I'm fully accountable for that and driving that. And we have to take responsibility. I can't look at anybody else. And if we all take that responsibility, surely we're going to have bigger benefits as a society.
I completely agree with you, Faye. I think you know that, having spent time recording together recently. The report that you referenced there, the Engineers 2030 final report. If you're listening to this today and this is an area which you're either passionate about or wanting to do further reading in, the Royal Academy commissioned a report on National Engineering Day, which was Wednesday, the 5th of November. And again, they go into such good depths around what the definition of an engineer is and what it should be going forward as the roles begin to evolve, as technology and as industry begins to evolve, in particular in a time where we have such a skills and workforce challenge across multiple sectors. Well, thank you everyone for your reflections. The Business Barometer Report 2025 shows that 13.4% of 16 to 24-year-olds are not in education, employment, or training. That's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity to widen access and build a stronger pipeline of future engineers. The report ends with 5 key recommendations for employers. 1, use training to drive development. 2, tap into diverse groups. 3, reach out to young people early. 4, create opportunities in AI, digital, and sustainability. And number 5, partner with education providers. Together with these ideas, we can help move from a crisis to capability. Thank you to Faye, Mark, Neil, Gareth, and the Open University for hosting this conversation. I'm Josh Robertson. I'm the founder of Engineer Career. Thanks for watching, and thanks for being part of the future of engineering.